These are the physical and chemical properties and physical and chemical change notes. A physical property is any condition or quality or just basically anything about a substance that can be observed or measured without changing what it is. So you can look at the examples that are on here: hardness, color, conductivity, malleability, conductivity, conducting heat or electricity, malleability, pounding it down into a thin sheet, melting point, boiling point, density, specific heat, and we're going to talk a little bit more about specific heat. You also can do things like shape as well. So basically anything that is not going to change about a substance. You can use these properties to identify a substance. So if you know the density, you know the specific heat, you should be able to look it up on some type of table and find it. Just like we did in the lab when we found the density of a solid, a liquid, and gas, and you looked them up online. Same type of thing. Any physical property, you can do that. So, specific heat is how much heat is needed to raise the temperature of 1 gram of material 1 degree Celsius. Basically, how much heat do you need to add to warm something up? And the opposite is true: how much heat is lost as it cools down. Things like water have a very high specific heat, so it takes a lot of energy to warm them up, versus a metal that just a little bit is needed to. This is a physical property, so if you know this value, you can identify a substance based off of it. It follows the equation Q equals mc delta T. Q is heat, m is mass, C is specific heat, which is the constant for each individual substance, and delta T is the change in temperature. So we're going to do an example here. We have the how many joules of heat are required to heat 150 grams of room temperature water, which is 22 degrees Celsius, to a temperature of 150 degrees Celsius. And C for water is 4.184. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by identifying what we have. We have a mass of 150 grams. We have a specific heat value, a C value of 4.184. And we need a change in temperature. Now, change in temperature is always going to be the difference between two temperatures if they're given. So in our case, we ended up at 150, and we're going to subtract what we started at, which was 122, and we're going to get 128 degrees Celsius. So then what we're going to do is we're going to plug this in because we're trying to solve for heat, which is Q. And Q is mc delta T. Well, we have mc and delta T, so we can just plug in. M is 150. C is 4.184, and delta T is the 128. So, and we're not going to worry about significant digits for this. When you multiply this all out, you get 80,332.8. The units for heat are joules. So you just put a J. As far as plugging into that equation, it's always going to be straightforward, and you're going to be given 3, asked to solve for the fourth one. So as long as you can do the algebra, you're going to be okay. A physical change, then, is anything that changes the properties of the material but not the material itself. So think of ripping up. A piece of paper that you rip up is still a piece of paper, it's just smaller pieces. If you cut a wire, it's still a wire, it's just smaller. Phase changes. You know, if ice melts to liquid water, it's still water. It's just changed what phase it's in. That follows the law of conservation of matter. That matter can be created, cannot be created or destroyed, only changed. Down here now we're moving to chemical properties. Chemical properties is the ability to undergo a specific chemical change, meaning a specific chemical reaction. So a chemical property is something like, if I add acid, will it react? If I set it on fire, will it burn? So anything that's going to change the substance. If I add oxygen, will it oxidize or rust in the case of iron? Okay. So a chemical reaction is any time where you start with one thing and end up with something else, or multiple something else. A reactant is anything that you start with. A product is anything you end up with. You're always going to look for 4 clues to see whether or not a chemical change took place. 1, you're looking for a transfer of energy, which is heat. It will either get hotter or it'll get colder. It's any change in temperature is a transfer of heat. So don't always think of it as warm. It can be cool as well. Change in color. So we did that in the first week. We had blue chemicals that we added aluminum foil to. It turned a grayish color. So that's a change in color. That's a sign of a chemical reaction. A production of a gas, which is bubbles. Anytime you see some bubbles, that usually means that you're seeing a production of a gas. And the formation of a precipitate. And I define a precipitate as any solid that forms when you mix 2 liquids. And we're going to see that in the lab.